The truth about the meat inspection, how big businesses win the game. I want to share a story that challenges a well-known but part of American history, the message of the meat of 1906 Meat Inspection Act. Most of us learned in high school that this law was passed to protect consumers from dangerous and unsanitary meat products. The story usually goes like this. Paul Sinclair wrote a shocking book, The Jungle, exposing the horrors of the meatpacking industry. The public was outraged and the government stepped in to fix the problem. It's taught as a classic example of brave reformers standing up to greedy corporations, but according to historian and economist Murray Rothbard, that version is mostly a myth. His work, especially in the progressive era, tells a very different story. One where the real winners were not consumers or reformers, but the largest meatpacking corporations in America. These companies didn't resist the law, they helped write it. Let's take a closer look at what Rothbard argues and why this law was not really about food safety at all. Federal regulation was a business strategy, not a reform. Rothbard starts by showing that the push for federal meat inspection didn't begin in 1906. In fact, companies like Armour and Co. and Swift and Co. have been lobbying it for since the 1880s. The reason wasn't public safety or morality, it was profit. These big meatpacking companies wanted government inspection as a way to satisfy European trade partners and create a legal monopoly or what economists call a cartel. Here's how it worked. Instead of spending their own money on quality control or private inspections, these government companies wanted the government, meaning taxpayers, to pay for it. This meant big savings for them and new barriers for everyone else. Imagine if only the biggest firms could afford to meet the new federal standards. That would automatically push smaller competitors out of the market, and that's exactly what happened. Small businesses couldn't keep up. For smaller packing businesses, this law was a death sentence. The Meat Inspection Act made it illegal to sell meat without a federal inspection, but federal inspections required expensive equipment, paperwork, and infrastructure. For the big corporations with massive plants and legal teams, this wasn't a problem, but for small independent meat packers, it was nearly impossible. Rothbard explains this clearly. The law wasn't written to protect the consumer, it was written to wipe out smaller competitors. This tactic is called cartelization. Through legislation, using government rules to block competition and control the market, and it worked. After the law passed, the number of meat packing firms dropped quickly. The biggest players, Armour, Swift, and Morris, gained even more power and market share. The moral cover we support the public good. At the same time, these corporations were pushing for laws that would help them. They pretended they were doing it for the public. They testified before Congress, they issued statements to the press, they claimed the welcome regulation because they cared about consumers, but behind closed doors, their motives were obvious. Our industry executive, even that it would be a commercial suicide to oppose federal inspection, not because it was a good policy, but because it let the big firms exclude smaller ones from the marketplace. Think about it. Once the law was in place, the big firms could say, we only buy from federally inspected suppliers, and only the big companies can meet the standard. This wasn't about quality, it was about power. Even Jay Odgman, Armour, the head of Armour and Co., openly said that federal inspection was valuable because it gave their products legitimacy and allowed them to shut out smaller players. What about Sinclair in the Jungle? This might be the most surprising part of Rockbird's story. Upton Sinclair, the author whose book supposedly triggered the whole reform movement, did not support the final law. Sinclair was a socialist who wrote The Jungle to draw attention to the horrible working conditions in the meatpacking industry. He wanted better pay, better hours, and safer environment for workers. But instead of addressing labor rights, Congress passed a law that helped the corporations, not the workers, and focused entirely on consumer safety, especially the cleanliness of meat. Sinclair later said, I aim at the public's heart and by accident I hit it in the stomach. In other words, people got upset about the dirty meat, not about exploited workers, and the law that followed ignored workers entirely. The final bill gave corporations everything they wanted. When the law was being debated in Congress, there were two big questions. Should companies pay for inspections? And should products be date stamped to show freshness? The big meat packers said no to both. They didn't want to pay for inspections and they didn't want customers seeing how old the meat was. And Congress agreed. The final law gave the corporations mandatory inspections, which were paid by taxpayers, no requirement to print dates on meat cans, I'm sorry, rules that small businesses couldn't afford to follow. After it passed, Swift and Co. even ran advertisements praising the law not as a burden but as a marketing advantage. A government inspection stamp was like a free badge of trust and quality. The real lesson and what textbooks get wrong. So, what's the big takeaway? According to Rothbard, this was never a story of the people versus corporations. It was a story of corporations using government power to entrench their position, raise prices, and limit consumer choice, all while pretending to act in the public interest. Most high school textbooks say the Meat Inspection Act was a victory for consumers, but the evidence suggests that it was a brilliant strategic move by big businesses. It's a reminder that not all regulation is created equally. Sometimes what looks like reform is actually a way for the most powerful players to rig the rules for their favor, while making the public believe they're being protected. To wrap up, the Meat Inspection Act was not forced on big business. It was shaped and supported by big business. It created barriers for small firms and allowed the largest companies to dominate the market. It gave consumers a false sense of protection while doing little for workers or for genuine good food reform. This isn't just a story about the meat industry, it's a case for how corporate power and government regulation can work together, not against each other.